Whether you're looking for answers to specific life questions or seeking to become the best version of you possible, welcome to the Mental Breakdown and Psych Reg podcast, where we offer insight, information, and strategies based upon research and years of practice as clinical psychologists. So sit back, have a listen, and get connected with our hosts, Dr. Berney Wilkinson and Dr. Richard Marshall. Welcome back. We're going to do another article today. Talk about another article today. And what I said this for the podcast for yesterday, but this is something that I love about what we do. Right. Today we're going to talk about an article that reviews a study that was first published in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology.
Of all places. I mean, what are we doing in a dermatology journal? Right?
You know,
one would ask.
Exactly. Right. One might ask that.
Right.
And so let me tell you the answer to that question. The answer to that question is that they did there was a fascinating study that looked at the relationship between mental illness, mental health problems, and physical diseases.
That's right. It's another one of those things that we suspect, we're pretty sure that there's a relationship.
Right.
But it's hard to document them because it's difficult to do these studies. But here's another article that explains the relationship between physical illness and mental illness.
Right. And we know, it's clearly described that, stress and depression and some of those things have an impact on our cardiovascular system. It has an effect on our brain functioning. And so from the perspective of cardiology, the fields of cardiology and neurology and things like that, certainly stress and depression has a clear impact on the functioning of those systems.
Right.
But here we have a study that looked at dermatological illnesses, specifically psoriasis.
Right.
And it was looking at the effects that mental health issues have on psoriasis.
On that one in particular.
That one in particular.
But psoriasis is interesting because it's an autoimmune
It's an autoimmune disorder.
Which makes it vulnerable to stress.
Right.
Okay.
Right. All right. And so what the study found, just to kind of cut right to it, what the study found is that people who are depressed and have psoriasis have an increased risk for developing something called psoriatic arthritis. And so that's a situation where some of that autoimmune inflammation gets into the joints. And affects your...
settles in the joints. Right, because when we talk about psoriasis being an autoimmune disorder, the autoimmune disorders include arthritis.
Right.
Okay, and so, it's another one of those things very commonly occurring gradually over from middle age on.
Right.
And so this is another one of those topics that should be of interest to almost everybody.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Particularly the elderly.
Right.
Middle age and beyond, because you're going to begin to experience those symptoms of arthritis.
Right.
But these are autoimmune disorders.
Right.
Which means we might be able to do something about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's so many connections to make here with other things that we've talked about before, and of course new things that we're going to continue to talk about.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. If you are predisposed to some things, like if you already have problems with psoriasis, or if you already have sort of dermatological issues or other autoimmune conditions, it is really important to recognize the impact and the potential worsening of symptoms if you're suffering from things like depression and anxiety and stress and that kind of thing. You really have to make sure and build into your overall treatment some form of stress reduction, relaxation, depression management, mood stabilization, not necessarily with medications, certainly not saying that, but you need to make sure that you're building into your treatment regimen something to address those symptoms, those characteristics, because we now have pretty clear evidence to suggest that those symptoms may and potentially will worsen your symptoms.
That's right.
Yeah.
We know the effects of, for example, we know the damaging effects of stress.
Right.
We know the damaging effects of anxiety. Now we're learning about the damaging effects of depression.
Right.
That these mental conditions. I hate to call them disorders or illness because you may not have a diagnosable disorder.
Right.
But
you may not be clinically depressed. You may just be having depressive symptoms.
Right. But the depressive symptoms might be sufficient to create that hormonal imbalance. So you start producing cortisol and other damaging hormones. So you don't necessarily have to have a mental illness for this to happen. But you need to be very, very careful.
Right.
Stress is very, very damaging. Depression is damaging. Anxiety is damaging. And to live with these conditions day after day, month after month, year after year, is eventually going to take a toll on your physical health.
Absolutely.
And it's going to be in the form of skin outbreaks of various types, like psoriasis, or arthritis. You're going to start having joint problems. Not because you're old, but because you're stressed and you're anxious and you're angry, and
absolutely,
and it creates these physical problems.
Absolutely.
So be very careful.
You know, the way that this connects with so many of the other things that we've talked about is that when we think about arthritis in particular, arthritis is an inflammation in the joints, and so when we look at the likelihood or the increased possibility, the increased likelihood of, depressive symptoms causing or increasing the risk of developing psoriatic arthritis, what we're talking about is the relationship between depression and stress and anxiety and everything and inflammation.
That's right. It's inflammation is the enemy.
Right. And so when we think about we've talked in previous podcasts about the negative consequences of physiological inflammation. Inflammation in the stomach, in the gut, in the brain, in different body systems. It creates these a variety, a whole host of problems for us.
Right.
And so this, again, in my mind, creates a very clear connection between depression and that whole system of symptoms. And inflammation.
That's right. Inflammation is the enemy, and inflammation can be prevented. Okay? It's going to create problems if you don't.
Right.
But inflammation is what we want to keep down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's very concerning and potentially dangerous, and it impairs functioning in so many ways.
Right.
I mean, when you have this inflammation going on, your body is under stress.
Right.
And so you're stressed or you're depressed, and then you begin to have this inflammation, and that creates more stress.
That's right.
And so it's this cycle, and it makes it difficult to, for your brain to function the way that it needs to function.
That's right, because once you get to physical symptoms, now you're adding that layer.
Right.
Now you don't feel as good as you'd like to. You can't exercise as much as you'd like to. You can't go out and be as social as you might like to. So then we get into one of those circular spiral things where the physical is the mental, and the mental is the physical.
Right. So, absolutely.
Yeah. So, be aware of this. Be aware of the inflammation problem.
Absolutely. So the moral of the story today is, you have to, if you have any health-related condition, but even if you don't have health-related conditions,
that's right.
You have to make sure that you're including some stress management, some relaxation, some mood stabilizing types of activities in your day, in your life, so that you can prevent the possibility of either worsening some of the symptoms that you already have, or as you were suggesting, creating issues that you don't have at this time.
That's right.
Right. So make sure that you're including some of those strategies in your daily life.
Take care of your bodies.
Right. Yeah. Exercise, eat well, sleep well, all that kind of good stuff. So, all right. That's it, right?
Good.
That's it for today. Another,
banging them out.
Getting it. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.